CRM was supposed to improve customer relationships. Instead, it's shorthand for Customer Rage Machine. Your CRM can't explain why a customer's package took 5 detours? Reboot your inner peace and scream into a pillow. It's okay. On the ServiceNow AI platform, CRM stands for something better. AI agents don't just track issues, they resolve them, transforming the entire customer experience. So breathe in and breathe out. Bad CRM was then. This is ServiceNow.
Why does every recipe I try need 18 ingredients, including a jar of something paste I'll never use again, but will sit in my fridge for 9 months? I just want dinner in the oven, fast. That's why I love Blue Apron's new one-pan assemble and bake meals. They send you fresh ingredients that are already chopped. All you do is put it all together and bake. That's it. No chopping, no weird leftovers, just delicious, easy-to-make meals. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast from Roker Report. And if you've been listening to our recent news roundup pods or keep up to date with the latest stories on the Roker Report website, or hopefully both, you will know that only too well that the rumour mill has gone into overdrive in terms of listing names that Sunderland are going to add to their squad this summer, or list of new clubs that are linked with Chris Rigg, which we might touch on. It feels like every passing day the media are absolutely sure on the cusp of making a breakthrough. So we thought we'd speak to someone who might hopefully make sense of it all. Today's guest not only has a distinction of covering European football for Sky Sports, but he can also view things from the unique perspective of being a massive lads fan, because today we're very pleased to have Dougie Critchley with us. Hello, Dougie.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. How's it going this summer? Because obviously it's a summer to enjoy, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it passed the 1 month anniversary of it the other day, and I've only just sort of come down from that high, if I ever will. It was just a remarkable day, wasn't it? I was lucky enough to be doing Sky Sports' social media stories, so I was right behind the goal that Watson and my ender scored in, and the noise afterwards has just been reverberating around my body for the weeks afterwards, and the amount of times we've all no doubt watched those highlights and drunk it in. And it just felt so unlikely for the final, 3 months of the season, then to score a last-minute winner against Coventry, then to score a last-minute winner against Sheffield United. It was just remarkable. I mean, it felt like we played well for about 100 minutes of the final 4 months, but it was the 100 minutes that mattered. And here we are back in the Premier League and now a massive summer ahead of us.
Well, we've said a couple of times on a few pods, probably because we don't believe it, but the ending, it's so unlike Sunderland. I mean, we talk about typical Sunderland in the negative sense most of the time, but like this never happens to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this record now we've got at Wembley as well. It used to be such a place of misery, but it feels like we go every couple of years. Results have really turned around there. And it was just, it felt like the connection between fans and club hadn't been as strong since the early 2000s, really, on the back of that. And it was just brilliant to see so many players that had been doubted in the previous months. Not least, Anthony Patterson really stepping up in that final. I thought Jobe Bellingham was brilliant. I'm sure we'll no doubt touch on it in this podcast. And then someone like Patrick Roberts as well coming off the bench. He's had his doubters as well. There's some big performances in there. And, they deserve an enormous amount of credit because having struggled for so long in League One and really never really getting to grips with that league whatsoever. And I think it obviously meant so much to our opponents every time we played someone in that division. But we did, aside from the year before last, make the championship and make the adaptation to the championship really successfully. And I'm hoping that this squad, with a few key additions, maybe 5 or 6 new players and a bit of squad turnover, can, make this Premier League campaign one to remember as well.
Yeah. Well, in terms of kind of feeling the pain for so many years before this, give a bit of background on yourself. So obviously, massive lads fan. Where did it all start?
It started really quite randomly through a family link. My granddad used to work for the club in the 1980s. So that's on my mum's side, and my uncle on that side as well, big Sunlun fan. And my dad, who sadly passed away about 10 years ago or so, he wasn't really a massive football fan. So I didn't have any influence coming in from that side, which is where my Scottish roots come from on that side. Yeah. So I was a Sunderland fan from the get-go, really. And I was born in 94. So the early 2000s, the sort of peak of our recent history, I'll say, was pretty blurred, to be honest. But really came into it from that sort of, I don't know, around the sort of Roy Keane promotion campaign. And then a few, great years under Martin O'Neill in the Premier League. And then obviously the sort of slow, painful demise. And then the double drop and Netflix and all the rest. So there's been a lot of pain with it. But I think having started working in football in 2017, the majority of people that I come across that work in the media are United fans, Chelsea fans, Arsenal fans, Liverpool fans, all the biggest clubs. And I think it's quite refreshing almost to come across fans that don't support some of the biggest sides and that really know what the vast majority of fans in this country go through on a week-to-week basis, which is a lot of pain, really, and a little bit of joy sprinkled in as well. So I think it's given me an interesting perspective on the struggles of clubs lower down. And then for the last few years with Sky, I've mainly done their European football coverage, and they obviously don't have the rights to show the Champions League or Europa League, etc. That's with TNT, but I do a lot of their promotion of, or previews, let's say, and reviews on Sky Sports News and stuff like that. So I've got a sort of European view, but my roots are definitely with Sunderland.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about that Netflix and this Hollywood story that's come out of it. Because I was sorting some old files out the other day. I was looking like a match preview we did to play Mansfield Town, and it doesn't feel that long ago. But is it like Netflix filmed us kind of that demise, and they've done really nothing on the way back up, which was the Hollywood story they wanted in the first place. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I remember those League One days. You're playing in stadiums that aren't fully complete all the way round. There's like a burger van in the corner, the ball's going over the hoardings and rolling away, and it just felt absolutely bleak. It was during COVID as well, so we were watching on that SAFC streams, which they did a great job on that. Massive respect to them for doing that. But it's sponsored by an asbestos removal company, and it really felt like we'd really hit rock bottom. And we struggled in that league massively. It was really, really bleak. We didn't play particularly good football. I thought surely we're going to get it together and get automatic at some stage. But then, Alex Neil comes in, does a great job, then leaves us at the start of the next season. And then that first championship year, I think, was really good fun, to be honest. And obviously losing in the semi-final against Luton was a real shame. Then the absolute disaster of 23-24. So to bounce back so spectacularly with a bit of an unknown manager, at least for most people, last year, and having so many doubts about us in the last 3 months of the season, I think it was an amazing story.
Yeah, it was the League One was a novelty for a year, but then it wore off pretty quickly. Going to those grounds. But just in terms of the media in general, because it was quite interesting looking at the playoffs, because even though we had this story almost building up and coming back up from League One, did you get the feeling that with, if you look at the semi-finals with Lampard and then moving on to Chris Wilder at Sheffield United, that actually with those bigger names or kind of celebrities, that maybe people didn't fancy us to go up, or even that they preferred the other clubs to go up rather than us?
I think definitely when Frank Lampard did so well at Coventry, that was obviously a big story. And, after difficult times with his second stint at Chelsea and Everton, etc., that's all obviously going to generate a lot of headlines. But I thought as soon as we got through that, people were really desperate for us to beat Sheffield United, at least neutrals that I spoke to. It did really feel like having Sheffield United having had such a miserable year the year before, changed so many of their players and been in touch for automatics throughout the entire year. I don't think anyone wanted Sheffield United or really Burnley to some extent. I think people want freshness in the league. I think Sunderland carries a lot of favour with Premier League fans for being an established member of that sort of Barclays era that everyone talks about so much. And the likes of Portsmouth and Sunderland and Bolton and Blackburn, people have a lot of nostalgia for the early 2000s. And Sunderland were a key feature of those years. And, never excelling in those years after the sort of Kevin Phillips era, but a very solid Premier League outfit for a number of years. And obviously with our history as a massive club and the sort of fan reputation we've got, I think most neutrals I speak to really respect Sunderland as an institution. And I think they're delighted to have us back. But I've tried to sort of temper expectations a little bit going into next year, because I mean, we'll cover it in this podcast, but I do think it's going to be enormously difficult.
Yeah, we'll definitely come on to that. But it is interesting you talk about that era. As soon as you mention Sunderland anywhere in the world, people will come back to you and say Quinn and Phillips. Wherever you are in the world, it doesn't matter where I've been, all over the shop, and that's the immediate reply you get. But speaking we spoke to Tom White recently, And he was talking about the huge increase in terms of exposure for the club because we're not used to it after, 7 years or something that we've been out of the Premier League. I imagine from your perspective, I mean, that actually Sunderland's been off your radar almost as being a club to cover. And now you can go, now I can actually look at what Sunderland are doing as part of my job.
Yeah, it's exciting, definitely from that perspective. I mean, Sunderland felt pretty irrelevant during our time in League One. People knew that the Sunderland were down there. They knew that we were struggling. They enjoyed watching the real insight you did get into a club falling apart on that Netflix series. You see these all or nothings, and they've done an Arsenal one and a Spurs one, etc. They're so Americanized and they're so polished, and you see what the club allow you to see. They're too big as an institution, whereas Sunderland Till I Die, as much as I hated watching it, it was absolutely fascinating to get the insight into the decision-making and the characters and the woeful decision-making, really, throughout that entire series. And it was so watchable. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. And I think in that, it created a lot of negative headlines, and obviously fans would chant about seeing us cry on Netflix, blah, blah, blah. But it did keep Sunderland a little bit relevant during that time. And I think now, most people that I spoke to were desperate for Sunderland to come back and do really respect the history of the club in terms of, league titles and FA Cup wins. And I think, it's definitely a feel-good story. And especially given the fact that we've kind of done it, quote unquote, the right way. We haven't just spent our way out of those divisions. We've invested in young players. We've turned profits on players. We've made sensible decisions, which wasn't something associated with Sunderland for so long. The final 5-6 years in the Premier League, it was changing manager all the time, then beating Newcastle, then a demise, then changing and the pattern would just continue, and changes of sporting director, bringing in players that were clearly invested more in themselves than the club. And to see players that genuinely care for the club and that have risen through the ranks with them, with a sprinkling of academy graduates in there as well, what's not to like from a neutral or a Sunderland fan's perspective?
Yeah, and actually Sunderland Till I Die, you can watch it now with a completely different perspective than you could 2 or 3 years ago, because we were still in it. But I mean, just in terms of yourself in the summer, I mean, because I imagine that, as kind of looking out at Europe, that, that you think, season's finished. But I imagine actually that the summer's just as busy as any other part of the season, because you're expected to keep on top of all the movement that's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of our sort of weekly shows or content that I do on Sky Sports News, for example, that doesn't happen during the summer so much. There's more transfer content. But in terms of the YouTube content that I do for Sky Sports, that definitely still continues and continues apace, because when there's less football on, interestingly, you do more clicks, you do more views. Like, it's the time to cash in, because everyone wants to be kept up to date with transfer news and transfer speculation, people's opinions on it. So it's definitely a busy time of year. But my job, because people might see me on Twitter commenting on transfers, I don't have first-hand information. I'm much more of a sort of reaction person, or I'm a content creator. I hate that phrase, but I don't have sources. Keith Downey, for example, who does the Northeast for Sky Sports News, he has genuine sources. He'll be talking to clubs and agents, etc. I'm much more in the role of like a presenter, really. But I just like enjoying putting my thoughts out there on various transfers across a whole range of clubs, really. And it often leads to a certain amount of blowback on social media, because people hate it if you criticize potential transfers. But you've got to stick to what you believe in and put your sort of tin hat on and go for it, because the realization that not everyone's going to enjoy your opinions and not going to like you on social media in a vast range is just it's key. You can't please everyone, and especially if you're criticizing clubs' transfer business or players or managers, etc. Social media is so volatile.
Don't get me on my soapbox about social media. I'll tell you what, we'll be here all day. But it is interesting, interesting talking to you almost full stop, because you're covering Europe. For the last few years, we've been talking to Simeon Golem, quite on and off, covering the English Football League. And it's just it's a bizarre thing that we had to, we had correspondence around the playoffs, and it was almost like, right, see you later now, once we've done that. But it's just a sign of the times that we're moving on from talking to, correspondents who deal with that to now, and we're talking about that exposure that the clubs now, we talk about moving up a level, obviously, to the Premier League, But I think, because I think it was 9 years, I think, since we were preparing for a Premier League season, I actually think it's changed so much in almost that time that actually I think we're gonna surprise a few people at Sunderland just how much coverage we're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole landscape of European football has really changed in that time as well. You know, back in when we were getting relegated in 2017, it did still feel like La Liga was where the majority of top players were. I think the Premier League was considered the best in the world in that time, but it wasn't really until Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp really started turning Man City and Liverpool into the sides that they were. And then there was the influx of, you know, your Contes and Emerys and Pochettino was still there, etc. It did really feel like the caliber of manager in the Premier League was higher than any other league in the world. And then the impact of COVID, and that has just it's caused so many financial issues for clubs in Spain, in Italy, less so in Germany because they're fan owned, but the financial imbalance of the Premier League versus the rest of the Europe is absolutely vast now. And when you see last year, for example, Bournemouth signing FC Porto striker for £50 million and Evan Nilsson, and you're like, that's Bournemouth. Like, no disrespect to Bournemouth, but it's a tiny club, and it's crazy what Premier League money for a few years can do. So, like, Sunderland have a really good opportunity, and I think they'll probably target real sort of bargains with a little bit sprinkling of experience from Europe this summer, because they're so much more bang for your buck than signing off Premier League clubs because they are all so wealthy. And I think the promising news for Sunderland, if I was looking forward, was, you know, Wolves have lost Cunha and Aït-Nouri, Brentford have lost Frank, and Mbeumo might leave there as well. Bournemouth have lost Kerkez, they've lost Kepa, they've lost Zabani's potentially leaving, Huijsen. So we basically need, because the Premier League's been so locked off over the last, 2 seasons, no one's been relegated, and it's not even been particularly close last year and the year before. We needed some of those middle pack, I would describe as, to get considerably worse. And you look at Man United and Spurs, I don't think there's a chance that they're 15th and 17th again. So we need one of those middle, who've been established for a few years, to drop down and make this a competitive relegation scrap. Because if a club doesn't take a considerable drop off and doesn't recruit to the same level that they've lost talent, which is going to be a challenge for them. Like, Cunha was one of the best players in the Premier League last year, and Mbeumo's one of the best players in the Premier League last year at Brentford. It's going to be difficult for their incomings to hit that same level immediately. So maybe there's a chance that a few more sides get into this relegation battle mix, because, yeah, Sunderland are going to need someone to have a drop-off to survive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, it's markets you report on in terms of those European markets. And I mean, we'll get into specific names in a minute, but all the links seem to be in those markets, in those European kind of leagues that might, let's say, are not as well off as the Premier League. Let's put it that way. I mean, is that where we're going to focus, do you think, just purely so we don't spend inflated prices?
Yeah, I'd have thought so. I think Speakman obviously has a lot of experience in dealing with the EFL, but you look at Kirill Lewis-Dreyfus, you look at Lebris, like that's their experience is in France. I think there's so many bargains to be had in France. You look at the financial situation they've got there and not knowing the league sponsor for so long. You look at Lyon just being relegated due to financial issues. If Lyon are being relegated for financial issues, you know, their clubs can't really stand up to Premier League money. I think what will be interesting is obviously Sunderland overspent to such a degree the last time we were in the Premier League, and, you know, whether it is Ndong or Rodwell, etc. I mean, it's horrible even remembering all these names, but, you know, we clearly didn't recruit very effectively, and we'll have to get it right. We're not going to want to overspend, because there's a decent chance that we are relegated at some stage in the next few years. Hopefully not, but you can't get into a position where you've overspent and you do a double drop, or you know, we just can't go down to League One again. And we can't, you know, go back down to the bottom half of the Championship again. Last year, the season before last, was really bleak. So need to do sensible additions. And I imagine we'll mainly look in the markets of France, Belgium, Germany, especially because if you look at the sort of makeup of our squad, most Championship squads, especially one that's spent time in League One recently, their homegrown quota is absolutely fine. So we've got the opportunity now to add some really talented players from abroad, flip them for profit in a few years' time, and hopefully help establish Sunderland as a force in the Premier League again. Yeah, well, you've kind of touched on it there, because, I mean, I suppose it's a good time to talk about Florent Ghisolfi.
Apparently an imminent appointment, but has been for days now. It seems to have been really stretched out as we record. I mean, by the sounds of what you read, he's been on the radar of quite a few big clubs. And of course, just left one in Roma as well. You almost forget how big some of these clubs are because you end up dealing with them straight away. I mean, if this does become confirmed and, you see the scarf pick, even though he is on the staff, but how much of this is a coup for the club? And as you touched on there, is it an obvious one in terms of Christian Speakman having experience in the AFL, but he needs help in dealing with these bigger transfers?
I think it's a really, really exciting appointment if it does go through. I mean, there was reported, I will say reported before fans get angry, there was reported interest from Newcastle. There was reported interest from Juventus, reported interest from Fiorentina, clubs that are far more established than Sunderland in the top divisions recently. So I think it's a real coup on that front. And then he's got a fascinating backstory as well. So he's only 40 years old, but he had a sort of middling playing career, I think it's fair to say. Played for the likes of Bastia in France. He became sporting director at Lens in 2019, and they just finished 5th in Ligue 2. He helped get them promoted the following year with the players that he signed, and then back-to-back 7th place finishes. For a club of Lens' stature, it was absolutely amazing. And what you like to see, obviously no sporting director has a faultless record in terms of recruitment, but he's got an amazing record of getting deals over the line, and the quantity of deals and the level of deals that he's managed to pull off at various stages, I think is really impressive. So he managed to persuade Seko Fofana, who was one of Serie A's most promising midfielders at that time at Udinese, definitely one of the most underrated. He joined from Lens. He also brought in Facundo Medina, who's a centre-back who's still at the club from Argentina. He's gone on to be capped 7 times by Argentina. Jonathan Klaus, who's got capped with France. He's now at Marseille. Loic Bade, who spent time at Sevilla. He spent time at Forest in recent years. He signed Arnaud Calamuendo on loan from PSG, who's a really exciting young prospect as well. He managed to flip Loic Bade for a €17 million profit in one season. He also signed the likes of Kevin Danso, who's now at Spurs, Luis Openda, who's at RB Leipzig, Samed, who's obviously at Sunderland as well. He sold Sheikh Doucouré for a huge profit to Palace. So it was a really successful debut, first sporting director appointment, let's say, at Lens. He also would have come across Le Brice during his time at Lorient as well. He then joins Nice as sporting director. And in his first summer there as well, he signs Terem Moffi from Lorient, again, dealing with Le Brice's club. Jeremy Boga from Atalanta, Morgan Sanson, who'd had a difficult time at Villa, and Romain Perrault, who'd played pretty well for Southampton as a left-back in the Premier League. And in his first season, he joined in October, so he didn't have control over that summer budget, but they finished 9th. They then finished 5th in his second campaign. Then he joins Roma, and Roma is an absolutely enormous club. And to sign a sporting director from Roma who was dealing with a budget of, 130 million euros, I think they spent last summer, is a real coup if he managed to get this over the line. And again, he managed to lower the age of the squad. They got rid of the likes of Rui Patricio. They got rid of Smalling. They managed to offload high earners who weren't really delivering, like Tammy Abraham and Spinazzola, who's coming back from injury, and Houssem Aouar. And then he brought in some really, really exciting young players. Dovbyk had shone at Girona. He was one of La Liga's top scorers the year before when Girona qualified for the Champions League. Matthias Soulé from Juventus. Juve fans were furious that they managed to steal a player of that talent level off them. Similar to Huijsen going to Bournemouth, like Juventus have let go of so many promising youngsters that are easily good enough for their first 11 in recent seasons as well. Manu Kone arrived from Gladbach. Enzo Le Fee, of course, arrived from Rennes at Roma, struggled for game time at Roma, but then obviously ended up at Sunderland as well. And although they had a difficult time managerial-wise with Daniele De Rossi being fired in September, Ivan Juric, who then went to Southampton, he was fired in November, he got the Claudio Ranieri appointment spot on. No one in Serie A took more points across Ranieri's 26 games, which was level with Inter Milan, who eventually finished second to Napoli. So they eventually finished 1 point off Champions League qualification. And it was really the poor start that cost them under De Rossi and Ivan Juric. And so many of those players, particularly Soulé and Dovbyk, and Manu Kone actually, became key players by the end of the year. So if he can bring some of that knowledge of European markets, and sporting directorship is incredibly difficult. I read recently, it was Victor Orta, who used to be at Leeds, who was then at Sevilla. he was effectively like, it's like being in a burning car and you're constantly having to decide what bit of water to put on first, because some players wants to leave, an agent wants this request. It's spinning plates professionally. And he has a brilliant record of improving clubs that, you know, if we're being totally honest, have had a lot more success than Sunderland in recent years. And given the calibre of clubs that were after him as well, reportedly, I think it'd be a real coup. And his ability to get deals over the line, like Sunderland realistically need to hit the ground running this summer and sign a number of players and offload a number of players too. So I like the fact he's got a huge contacts book.
Yeah. And well, like you said, we're still waiting for that one to be confirmed. But let's move on to the players, and let's start with the two that have been confirmed so far in terms of big profile transfers. Obviously, the big departure, which was, of course, Jobe Bellingham. It didn't turn out to be a huge saga. It moved quite quickly in terms of transfers that sometimes can drag out like this. But it started pretty much after the final whistle at Wembley. Seemed like it was a different club every day for about a week, and then finally went through. I mean, how did you see all that playing out? I mean, because it was interesting that it seemed to flit from club to club, because I just presumed that the Bellingham kind of camp, if you like, would have all this planned out.
Yeah, it did seem to change quite regularly between Eintracht Frankfurt and Dortmund. And I think the big debate there was Eintracht Frankfurt also have Champions League football next year. And maybe there was a debate within the camp, I would have thought, about whether it's nice to be outside of your brother's shadow and don't just join the club where your brother was Bundesliga Player of the Year just 3 years ago. And, you know, he's obviously made a bit of an effort to create his own reputation. That was clear by putting Jobe on the back of his shirt, etc. And he doesn't just want to live off his brother's reputation. What frustrated me was so much reaction from particularly neutrals saying, what are Dortmund doing? Well, they've just bought him because he's called Bellingham. Clubs don't invest on the basis that they liked your brother. They just don't spend that amount of money on it. It's just absolutely ridiculous to even begin to argue that. And look, his first year got moved around a number of different positions. I thought he slightly faded towards the end in particular, but it was a difficult campaign, as we've obviously touched upon already. But his second year, I thought he didn't really take a backward step and actually showed a lot of positional discipline when we did bring in Le Fee, etc. And there was a bit more creativity in front of him. And I actually thought he had a massive game in the Championship playoff final, a really, really good game, especially during our struggles. He felt like one of the key players to wrestle back initiative from Sheffield United, especially with, Dan Neil had a real difficult game in that final as well. But yeah, a massive move to Dortmund. Was I slightly surprised that a Champions League club wanted to spend 30 million euros or whatever it was in the end on him right now? Potentially. But I think there's obviously a huge, huge talent in there. The way he moves, his physicality, he's a brilliant duel winner. He can pick a pass. There's so many raw ingredients there as well. And ultimately, I think it kind of worked quite well for us. We can't really complain too much. He's got to move to a Champions League club. We've got a good fee for a player we signed for £2 million, the year before last. It's a kind of win-win all round. And I wish him all the best there. I don't really hold any animosity to him. It's a great financial deal for the club, one that the Sunderland have needed to make for a while, turning profits on key players like we did with Ross Stewart as well, and Tommy Watson, of course. And it just felt like another sign that Sunderland were getting smarter and smarter in the transfer window.
Yeah. And you touched on being slightly surprised maybe at the fee, but how much impact do you think the World Club Cup had on that? And just on that transfer specifically, and in general, what impact is that going to have on the transfer market overall?
I think it could have a pretty big one. Chelsea have already through their 3 group games, I think brought in £35 million, which is paid for Liam Delap. The winner of that competition gets £90 million. It's a vast, vast sum for a competition that no one really cares about except for the financial impact. And in different countries as well, if a Argentinian or, Moroccan or Tunisian side progresses far, the financial impacts of that on how that will impact the league and their spending over the next few years, it could make really sort of uneven competition across the world, which I don't think has really been factored in. And look, there's every chance that it is a European giant that wins that competition. But the South American sides in particular have started really well. They're obviously mid-season. The European sides have started really slowly. But in terms of Jobe starting and scoring in his first game, it just feels like the Bellinghams always step up, whatever adaptation they have to do, whether it's Jude or Jobe. he looked pretty at home at Sunderland, obviously, when he first joined, and Birmingham to Sunderland's not a massive change, obviously, but when the team got considerably better this year, I thought Jobe rose to the occasion and was one of our better players throughout the entire season. And then Jude's obviously just a complete freak, really. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever made a move to Real Madrid look so easy. And as soon as he's been starting regularly for England as well. But I mean, Niko Kovac got appointed about February time as Dortmund manager, changed to a 3-4-3, which will obviously be a change of system from what he was used to at Sunlun. But I think that could suit Jobe Bellingham's game quite well because he's got the assurance of another defender behind him. He can obviously drive forward really effectively, pick some nice passes. But in terms of his energy and physicality, that seems perfect for a 2 in a midfield 4 and 3 in front, 3 behind.
Yeah, fully expecting them to kick on. In terms of the one signing so far, Enzo Le Fee, which you've already touched on, and we could see Look 9 confirming the signing at Wembley as they were ready to pick up the trophy. But I've been thinking back, how much of a statement of intent was that signing, given the fact that we'd basically signed up to it as a championship club on the basis of going up? And were you a little bit surprised when we'd managed to pull that off in the championship?
Absolutely, yeah. This was a player that I'd sort of seen a little bit of at Lorient. Definitely heard people talking about on podcasts and seen articles about him and just saying what a talent this guy was. Obviously, his move to Rennes and then Roma didn't really work out, but that was still 2 clubs that spent over 40 million euros on him in consecutive summer windows. And Roma just quite simply had too many midfielders last year. Manu Kone obviously arrived as well. And it was almost a strange buy, given the fact there wasn't an obvious place for him in the starting 11. But when he signed for Sunderland, I remember it was the most excited I've been about a signing in. I can't remember the last time. I really can't. In terms of his age, the fact he played under Lebris before. It wasn't
Ndong and Rodwell then, put it that way.
No, it wasn't. And just how varied his game is as well. Like, he is so comfortable in tight spaces. He's great dribbler. He can pick a pass, but he also works so hard. And I think he went off like a rocket, got injured, struggled somewhat in the final months of the campaign, I think it's fair to say, amongst a team that was really struggling for form and rhythm. But then in the playoffs, against Coventry and particularly against Coventry, but then also in the final 30 minutes of that game against Sheffield United, it was Le Fee rather than anyone else that felt like the sort of heartbeat of that side. And he was absolutely immense. And for 19 million, I think it's a sensational signing. And we need players that have got experience, not just playing at the top level, but also excelling at the top level. And he's got a number of years of experience playing in a top 5 league now. For me, he's of the caliber of playing for a Europa League level club, which is what he has been in the last couple of years at Rennes and Roma. To have him at Sunderland, I think it's a real treat. And he'll be watching our summer business, no doubt, with interest as well. And he wouldn't I know it was an obligation to sign him, but he would have had some idea of, if we go up, who else is arriving. And I'm sure they've laid out the plans for the side and kept him on board.
It is interesting because you look at some of the reaction and people trying to almost, again, social media. I'm not going to bang on about social media, but some of the reaction on there to Sunderland, they're saying we should sign someone. People forget that we've already signed this player and broke the transfer record already.
Yeah, absolutely remarkable. I think it's a really brilliant addition. I'm so glad we got that obligation to buy in as well, because I can imagine other clubs coming in for him on the basis of that 6 months, despite the injury. He really did show that sort of level of quality, particularly in those big games against Leeds, etc. Gave Luke Ayling an absolutely horrible time. He's a Premier League level player, guaranteed.
Yeah, I think one of the lads saw him at the airport, Luke Ayling, going on holiday, and I think he was still spinning around looking for Enzo Le Fee, I think. Actually, I was going to say, the interesting thing about Le Fee, that playoff final, was that he changed the game when he dropped deeper, which I thought was really interesting. Might be something we'll see more of next season. But let's get into some of the latest rumours for players that were linked with joining the club. And look, by the time this goes out, it all might have changed. Who knows? But we'll see how we go. Let's start with the Nice goalkeeper, Marcin Bulka, 25 years old, Polish international. And the day that we record, things seem to be moving pretty quickly. So we'll see where things are when this goes out. There seems to be a bit of a scramble for his signature across Europe. Very highly rated. Fee of around 20 million is apparently the cost of him. I mean, what do you make of this one?
I'm extremely excited. I can't really if this guy was linked with Chelsea right now, I wouldn't have been surprised. I do genuinely think he's been that good for Nice over the last couple of years. He actually came through Chelsea's academy, or at least spent time there between 2016 and 2019. So he counts as homegrown. He then goes to PSG briefly, gets loaned and then sold to Nice, and he's playing back up to Walter Benitez, who's a really solid goalkeeper. He's actually just joined Palace this summer for his first 2 years. But in the last 2 years, he's been undisputed number one, and he's helped them to a 5th and 4th place finish. His save percentage has never dropped below 76% in that time. And for a top-level goalkeeper, anything above 70 is really, really top. And the year before last, he kept 17 clean sheets, which was 3rd best in Europe. So he's operated at an incredibly high level for the last 2 seasons. He's very, very agile for someone who's 6'6". He's very good at claiming crosses. And look, I think Anthony Patterson deserves enormous credit for playing a crucial role in 2 promotion campaigns. But would I have been that confident with him being our number one for that first game of the season against West Ham, as well as he played in the Championship final? I thought he was a potential area to upgrade, not to sell on. I don't want to lose Patterson because obviously he's got a big, big future at the club. But Marcin Bulka, I think with his experience playing and excelling for a club at the top of a top 5 league, I think this is a real upgrade and a real steal as well. And I'm surprised more top clubs aren't in for him. So I'm cautious about this one just because it feels too good to be true. But he's a very, very solid all-round goalkeeper.
Yeah, but I almost feel like this one, and we'll almost kind of come on to the others in a different sense, but I almost feel like this one, because it's an area where you're not expecting it, that almost this makes it more plausible, because some of the other ones feel a little bit lazier in terms of the links and the positions. But this one where you think, we've already got Patterson in goal, that actually we wouldn't be linked with a goalkeeper if there was something in it. And it just feels because of that, it's one of our stronger positions on paper, because there's positions where we're actually low on kind of how many players we've got to play that position, that you might think they'd leave it alone. But it just feels like there's something to it because it's one of our stronger positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have necessarily nailed down that we'd strengthening goalkeeper before sorting out a number of different positions. But I think it's important to note that clubs don't just work on one deal at once, and they don't sign players in order of priority either. So they obviously saw that Bulka, there was a potential to bring him in. Maybe he's said to his agent, look, I'm wanting a Premier League move this year, want to increase my wages or whatever it is. And they've seen this as a great opportunity. And maybe we'll readjust the budget in different positions on the back of this, etc. But it's too good an opportunity not to sign him. And I think you look at Newcastle looking to sign James Trafford this year, who had a phenomenal year in the Championship. But someone like Bulka, I think is a bit of a step up on James Trafford and has definitely excelled to a higher degree than James Trafford has the last time he was in the Premier League, at least. So, yeah, I think this will be a real coup. But I didn't necessarily see it coming.
Just out of curiosity, do you think, you mentioned about Anthony Patterson still having a future, but I imagine there might be a few clubs who are looking at maybe European kind of quarters and having homegrown players and things like that, who might then look at Patterson and think, well, actually, he might be a good signing to maybe park on the bench for one of the bigger clubs.
Yeah, I know. I remember a few years ago, it was around the same time that Dan Neil was being linked there. Liverpool was supposedly reportedly into Anthony Patterson and Dan Neil, which I was pretty surprised about at the time. I don't know how serious those links were. But yeah, you're right. Keeping 2 quality goalkeepers, and if you can get 15 to 20 million pounds for Patterson and you manage to upgrade in that position without spending that much more on Bulka, then maybe Sunderland would have to consider it, especially if they are planning on signing at least one centre-back, you'd have thought, full-back cover / maybe even a starting full-back, probably 2 central midfielders. They're obviously looking at a left winger as well. I think we could do with an upgrade on the right wing as well. And then probably a striker. Like, you could kind of make a case that Sunderland need to strengthen in every single position this summer. Except for maybe, try Hume and Dennis Sirkin. I think I'd probably be happy with them starting. But then there's speculation Sirkin is wanted by Spurs. So who knows? It's obviously going to be, as soon as this Club World Cup is finished and players and agents are fully focused on this transfer window, there's going to be a lot of speculation around a vast majority of a vast number of clubs. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the left wing or possibly striking position, but there's Armand Loriente, and I've probably absolutely butchered that again, the pronunciation. Me and Gav are well known for not being able to pronounce anything. scored a load of goals in Serie B last season, and there's that slight Lorient link, although I think they only crossed for about a month looking into it. But, you know, it doesn't seem like the profile doesn't seem quite right, but, you know, in terms of, I think he's like 26, I think, off the top of my head. Did score quite a few goals, but he does seem like in the Mayenda Isidore kind of mould where he can play up front and play wide.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's primarily a left winger who can play up front. I think vast majority of his games last year were up front in Serie B. Sassuolo got relegated the year before. I think he scored 18 in Serie B, which is a really solid return. But I'm quite excited about this, to be honest, especially given the fact it's Tommy Watson leaving and Loriente potentially coming in. I think he would be the starting left winger. And looking at his history in terms of where he's been, what he's done, it's pretty exciting. So he made his senior debut with Rennes way back in 2018-19. He then went to Lorient, initially on loan, where Régis was head of youth development before becoming manager, so would have had an active role in bringing him in. He helped Lorient get promoted in his first year. Then in his first season in Ligue 1, he gets 8 league goals and assists from 16 league starts, pretty solid. The next year, 8 again. They were finishing 16th both years as well. So this is a club of sort of, doing as well as Everton or Man United last year, strangely enough, as well. And then moves to Sassuolo in 22-23 and gets 13 goals and assists in his first season, 9 in his second. And in that second season, they lost Raspadori, who went to Napoli, Locatelli went to Juventus, Hamed Junior Traore went to Bournemouth, and they ultimately got relegated. But he showed so much promise, particularly in his debut campaign in Serie A, which I think is something to note as well. He took to the adaptation from Ligue 1 to Serie A, which is a step up, and made it look very easy. He scored against Milan, he scored against Atalanta, he scored against Roma. He ranked 9th in the entire division for chances created. Only Rafael Leao and Kavisha Kvaratskhelia completed more dribbles than him, and he was 4th for dribbles into the box as well. So there's so much promise in his play, and having watched a few highlights of him way back then and done a bit of research in the last few days as well, he's obviously got a lot of pace on the break. He's pretty two-footed. But what I really like about him is he's not just a head down, get to the byline and hit and hope. There's a lot of cuteness to the balls that he can play to teammates in and around the box as well. And he does just seem like a slight step up in quality and experience on someone like Romain Mundle, who I thought had a really good year, to be honest, but obviously had some injury issues in there as well. So with that experience of playing in Liga, in Serie A, and you mentioned not quite fitting the model, but I do think we're going to have to slightly break away from the model if we want to survive.
Are you expecting that?
I would have thought so. I think a few of our additions will be, I wouldn't have thought much older than 28, but 28, in that 25 to 28 bracket, because we do need players with a bit of experience in a top league who are ready to hit the ground running and instantly elevate this side. Because the great thing about Enzo Le Fee is that he's still very young, and we'd have a sell-on value if disaster struck and we went down, or in a couple of years' time or whatever. But he'd also been playing football at a top level for so long, and I think that does make a big difference. Like, there's players in this squad that really haven't had much exposure to this whatsoever. Dan Neal, Luco 9, etc. These are players that, brilliant servants for Sunderland so far, but are pretty raw at this level, which is why it was a bit of a shame that Chris Mepham's gone back to Bournemouth as well, even though he'd ultimately been replaced by the end of the season. But yeah, I think experience will be a big factor.
Yeah. Well, actually, speaking of experience, you did mention about Dennis Serkin, but this is one Johnny described as a football manager style link in terms of Angelino, left back from Roma. 28 years old, as was said, maybe that's an example potentially of us breaking that, call it the model again, if anyone's kind of Christian Speakman bingo at home. But, again, maybe doesn't fit the profile we're being used to. But Dennis Serkin's contract is up at the end of the season, and potentially the club are thinking about that, they're concerned about that. I mean, are we going to be linked with half of Roma's squad now? Is it one of them? Or is there something in this because of Dennis Serkin's contract situation?
I'd be surprised, to be honest, if this one happened, just because he was so crucial for Roma last year. He played all of their 38 league games. I think he played over 40 in all competitions. It does seem a little bit random, but I'd absolutely take Angelino for sure. This is a guy first at PSV, then at Man City, whose academy he came through before going to PSV, and then Leipzig, Galatasaray, Roma. He's played for some big, big clubs. And I always had a little bit of a soft spot for him because he's a fellow Baldy as well. And he just looks like a sort of bald bullet when he just sprints through opposition defences. He's got good delivery from wide. And yeah, it's a very fun player to watch. And I could imagine also covering quite well on the left wing as well. He can play further forward. The thing that I've most seen him most promisingly is an attacking threat rather than a very solid defender. So if we are going to stick with a four at the back, there's maybe a slight concern there, but we definitely need quality in every position, and he'd definitely be a step up on Sirkin right now. Although I really like Dennis Sirkin. I know he struggled slightly in the playoff final, and has had some ups and downs, but I think there's a Premier League player in there as well. So yeah, let's see what happens with this. But for sure, in terms of his past CV, I think getting him to Sunderland would be quite a coup.
Are we getting a lot of that though? Because are kind of people in the media going back through past squads and going, right, who played for Lorient? Who's in the Roma squad? I mean, is that kind of sometimes where these links just come out of, where people put two and two together?
Quite possibly. I think there's probably a little bit of exaggeration. It depends on the standard of the source, probably. But I think I can only speak for what happens at Sky Sports News. But anything reported by Sky Sports News has to be verified by two different sources before it goes on TV, which ultimately means that Sky is quite behind Twitter, effectively now, where anyone can put anything on there. They don't care whether it's right or wrong. All they're looking for is interaction. So, yeah, the Sky Sports News has not struggled, but yeah, it's very different to what it was 10, 15 years ago in that respect, where, you know, top journalism or at least verified journalism, it's often behind the ball now because it's going on Fabrizio Romano's Twitter account from the get-go. He can often be wrong and, you know, nothing's really done about it.
Yeah, those days are long gone when players used to text into Sky Sports and, you know.
Exactly.
Sitting in their room, having a laugh, and then it used to end up on the ticker thing on Sky Sports News.
It's, you know, leaning outside their car window saying, I'm going to West Brom.
Yeah. Well, the last link, which isn't as high profile as the others, but Clement Bischoff, 19-year-old Danish midfielder, highly rated apparently, currently playing for Brøndby. This one sounds like the profile that we're used to. I mean, again, highly rated clubs apparently after him. Can you say anything in this one?
Possibly. I mean, I can't pretend that I'm a Brøndby or the Danish league expert whatsoever. But yeah, looking into a little bit of his background, I mean, this was his first full season at Brøndby, and he's actually played in so many different positions throughout coming through the academy. He's even played as a striker. He's played in midfield. He's played on the left. He's played as a left back. He's played on both wings as well. So he's clearly a very versatile player. But I would imagine from last year, from looking into his details last year, he mainly played on sort of left midfield, which doesn't feel like, if we're bringing in Loriente and we've obviously got Mundell, Le Fee can play out there as well, wouldn't be a priority. And then if he's also been used as sort of left wing back as well, maybe this is kind of the backup to Angelino, or maybe it's an alternative. But to be honest, having not seen that much of him play, I can't really say whether he's ready for the step up. And to be honest, as I kind of mentioned already, I'd rather see us sign 4 or 5 really high quality additions than bank too many on the future, because we can sign, it feels like we could probably sign this player if we're in the Championship. Whereas right now, I think we just need to add so much Premier League or top level quality to the side.
Yeah. I mean, Tom White actually, just before we go on to potential outgoings, Tom White hinted that he expects us to break our transfer record again. I mean, is that something you expect to see this summer?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at Ipswich last year, I know they'd done a double promotion, but they spent, I think it was £120 million and struggled massively. I think that was 5th in the world last year. And they still got relegated quite comfortably. So we do need to invest if we've got any chance of making this competitive. And the gap has never felt larger. As I've already mentioned at the top of the show, we need one of those mid-table sides or bottom mid-table sides to have a significant drop-off, which I can foresee. I think Brentford in particular, I know it's only June, but there's obviously so much of the window still to go, but they'll need to strengthen pretty effectively and get this managerial appointment right. But right now, yeah, Sunderland probably need to sign 2 or 3 players of around 15 to 20 million pounds, and hope that one of them really, really excels in the league next year.
Yeah, I've got 2 very good friends who are season ticket holders at Ipswich Town, and I'm meeting up with them in a couple of weeks, and I've got to remember not to laugh too hard because it might might come back on me.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd keep quiet.
Yeah, exactly. I'll feel, I'll comfort them and I'll feel sorry for them and all that. But anyway, outgoings. I want to start with the obvious one because I think, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think Bomber, who does our weekly transfer kind of gossip page and kind of collates all of that from social media and the other media, I think he was up to about 15 clubs or something that Chris Rigg's been linked with. But I mean, how much of this level of reported interest, how much of it is actually true?
I mean, I generally judge what's true by the top Twitter sources and what comes through on my emails at Sky. And I haven't had a single email about Chris Rigg. So I'm not saying that's a guarantee that he won't move, but I haven't seen anything particularly solid about this. And I don't know why the club, unless a massive, massive offer came in, I don't know why the club would sell him. I don't particularly know why he'd want to leave. I mean, he's so young still. There was talk about Man United throughout the season. There was also talk about Man United for Jobe Bellingham. Why would you go join Man United right now? It's been the death of so many players and the atmosphere at that club over the last few seasons. Why would you dive into that when you are playing for your homegrown club who have just got promoted? It's a real feel-good story. And having already lost Jobe Bellingham and got a pretty good fee for him, I can't really imagine Sunderland selling him, short of a monster offer. And actually, the way he was playing towards the end of the year, I don't think a club would offer the sort of fee that Sunderland would consider. So for me, this is a non-starter. I definitely wouldn't consider selling him whatsoever.
There you go. That's a guarantee. I'm taking it as a guarantee. He's going nowhere, by the way. Dear. You heard it here first. But the other one, I want to speak you back because I've always thought this is a really odd one. Dan Neil. Look, his contract is up at the end of the season. Hopefully, he'll sign a new one. But for a good while now, he's been linked away. But bizarrely, it's always seemed with Italian clubs. Now, I've always, the last couple of years, I've been amazed someone like a West Ham or an Everton or or even a Palace or someone like that haven't come in for a bid and give him that step up. But I mean, has there been anything in this in terms of him potentially or, having suitors from abroad?
Again, I haven't seen this, but I know that Italian clubs really value the sort of lower British market, if that makes sense. You've seen Shea Adams go to Torino. At Bologna, there's Lewis Ferguson, the Scottish midfielder. They've had Aaron Hickey before he went to Brentford. It feels like they probably see a little bit of value for money in that lower Premier League / Scottish Premiership or Championship market. And it's been really successful. Aaron Hickey then getting a move to Brentford. Lewis Ferguson's turned into Bologna's captain. They won the Coppa Italia last year. So maybe that's what Italian clubs are looking at. I think he's a really high potential player, but I don't know whether he's quite... I'd like to see how he does in the Premier League first, to be totally honest. I think there's a little bit of sort of frustration when I watch him play sometimes in that his decision-making, and he gives the ball away slightly too much for my liking for a central midfielder. And having already lost Jobe Bellingham, I really don't want to start with both our starting midfielders having gone, because then you're looking to build a brand new relationship, or you're hoping that two players settle. I mean, you have to form a new relationship anyway, but getting two players to settle in the Premier League, difficult task. I'd stick with Daniel and then try and bring in someone of a certain level of experience and quality, which is why the Jordan Henderson thing, I wasn't crazy on it compared to a lot of Sunderland fans, if I'm totally honest, given the fact he's 35. There's obviously a feel-good feeling about that. He's obviously an amazing leader and offers that experience that we've been talking about. But would I rather sign someone who's 26, 27, and if we go down, he's not going to retire on us, or give those minutes to a promising academy graduate alongside a new signing? Probably. It just felt like a bit of a pathway or a development blocker. But if he's happy to play 10, 15 games next year, then maybe it's an option. But it does feel like Marseille have now moved ahead of Sunderland in terms of the Jordan Henderson move.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's just talk about next season as a whole, because look, we know it's going to be difficult, but look, I've avoided match of the day for a long time, and I think a lot of Sunderland fans have as well. So, how big is our task that we've got in terms of, finishing above that bottom three?
Yeah, absolutely colossal, vast. The clubs down at the bottom, whether it's Wolves, West Ham, Man United, Spurs. They spent vast amount of money for a long, long time. And often not very effectively, but there has been a level of expenditure down there. You know, you look at West Ham struggling throughout last year with Jared Bowen, Mohamed Kudus, Lucas Paquetá. Like, these are players that could play for the vast majority of clubs throughout Europe who probably are at a higher level than West Ham. You look at Man United, their expenditure over the last few seasons. You look at Spurs winning the Europa League, look at Man United getting to the Europa League final. The quality down there at the moment is really, really high. And you saw an Ipswich and a Leicester side that got really, really good points tallies the season before last in the Championship. They were cut adrift quite considerably. So you're asking a Sunderland squad that only were in the Championship for 3 years, who didn't play particularly well towards the end of the year, who kind of, it was amazing, but kind of scraped into the Premier League, to be competitive, having had 3 weeks less time to prepare in terms of their transfer business. It's a massive, massive ask. And I don't mean to be miserable. I'm trying to be realistic. I think it'll be really difficult, but let's just enjoy it. It's been so long. It's been absolutely hellish road back. And we get to go to Old Trafford and Anfield and Stamford Bridge. And we've got an amazing start in terms of our fixtures. December looks like hell already. Yeah. But the start, if you can get 6 points from your first 4 or 5 games, then you're off. And hopefully we can be competitive. But mainly I know it's very easy to say this in June, but I'm going to just really try and enjoy it, because we've deserved it for a long time. It was miserable, this journey back. And now we've got an opportunity that I didn't necessarily think we'd get so quickly.
Yeah. But it's an important point to emphasize, though, because quite quickly, teams who are down there, and like I said, I was in touch with my mates at Ipswich, people can lose faith with what the club are trying to do and trying to build. And sometimes, it's not linear. You don't just keep progressing year after year. And sometimes you have to take a knock, go back. But it doesn't necessarily mean the thing that you're trying to do is wrong. And so sometimes, fans sometimes expect a knee-jerk reaction when you're losing games. But next year, it's almost got to be put into context all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, we finished 16th the year before. I think we've got an amazing opportunity in that, if we hadn't have got if we hadn't have gone up, Le Fee wouldn't have come in. And I think we'd have still lost Jobe Bellingham. And then you're starting a Championship year where it's now your 4th year in the Championship without 2 of your better players from last year. Almost through getting promotion, we've secured a better long-term future in terms of our finances, but a better short-term future as well. Because if we'd started next year without Jobe and without Le Fee, that's looking really difficult morale-wise, especially having got to a playoff final when we were so close to automatic for much of last year as well. To get there and lose, I think morale would have been devastated. And look, it wouldn't have knocked the project off track completely, but it would have been a real, real blow. So we've got up there. It was the most lucrative year to ever get promoted. It looks like a lot of lower mid-table clubs are going to lose their best players. So it opens a potential door, but let's see what happens.
Yeah. And look, just quickly in terms of the Premier League as a whole, if the 3 promoted clubs come straight back down again, how big a problem is this for the Premier League?
Yeah, massive. I think I saw that Sky, which I imagine is the same at TNT, it was their lowest viewing figures in quite a few years last year. And that was also because the Premier League title was wrapped up in March, April time. But there was no even hint of a relegation fight. And it could have been quite iconic, if one side had been competitive and there's Wolves, Man United and Spurs down there. It could have been brilliant. Yeah. It could have been one of the most watchable, relegation scraps of all time. It would have been brilliant. Man United apparently, getting pulled in on the last day, imagine.
Another Dennis Lawback ale, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be. It's concerning for the Premier League, but it's a product of the rest of Europe's finances struggling so much, and the amount of money and financial advantage that the Premier League has over the rest of Europe, which is why we need to strengthen effectively. And I think looking in that European market is the way to go. And you get 3-4 additions right, and there's every chance that Sunderland. Well, I say there's every chance. There's a chance that Sunderland stay up, and let's just enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, let's go on that topic of enjoying it. Are you going to be able to get to 1 or 2 games?
Yeah, I'm really hoping to. I work a lot of weekends, which is a bit of a pain. I've tended to do, Southern or London away games in the last few years, but I went up for the Leeds game last year, which was brilliant. But no, I'm going to try to commit as many as possible. It's something to drink in, something to enjoy. I can't wait.
Yeah, because, who knows, we might only get it for the 1 year and then not see it for quite a while. But that's a good point to leave it. Just leaves me to say it's been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully, when the transfers come rolling in, we can give you a shout and you can tell us all about it.
I'd be delighted to. Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Good stuff. Thanks for your time, Dougie. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Of course, we'll have all the news on the Roker Report website. We have try and update you on all of I'm going to say gossip, but I'll say nonsense on social media and the media linking us with everyone. And the daily releases from How We're the Podcast will come thick and fast. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.